show up. And they have these great powers, and they preach the gospel. And most believe that one of them is Elijah, and some believe that the other is Moses. But
Enoch, I believe most of them like it's Enoch.
Some do too. I mean, there's a list of like 4 or 5 candidates that most people have in their head. Because Enoch and Elijah both walked with God, and then
they both were raised.
Yeah, both were taken.
They didn't die.
Yeah, they didn't die.
They didn't die. But
So how does? Oh, sorry.
John the Baptist was like Elijah in a lot of ways, and maybe who knows? We really don't know, but they could be the same.
They could be. There is speculation though that, do you remember who John's father was?
I can't really think of his name right now, but
Or what did he do?
he's the one that went into the temple it was his turn to
The lot fell upon him. We read this in John chapter 1.
and he was told to call his name John.
Now, there is a story, and this is just a story, that Elijah's mantle, or in other words, the top part of his jacket, had remained in the temple until the time of John's father. This is just a curious little tidbit. And that some reputable scholars believe that John's father took the mantle of Elijah from the temple and gave it to John. And everybody would know exactly what that mantle looked like, because it was in the temple. So in that aspect, John could have come in what we would call the spirit of Elijah. Some translations in this verse say in the spirit of Elijah, not as Elijah himself. If you have the original King James, it says that. Just some interesting things to throw out for your own research. I can't say either way because there's no proof, but it's always interesting to talk about and ponder these types of things. If you're willing to accept it, John is Elijah. And for them, what would that do for a Jew hearing that? If Jesus says, if you're willing to accept that John was Elijah, what does that mean in the context of us reading Malachi?
Gives you permission.
Number one, but what was Elijah supposed to do in verse 5 of Malachi 4?
What was Elijah supposed to do? You mean before?
Well, according to Malachi, the verse we just read.
Well, he's going to be one of the witnesses, one of the 2 witnesses.
See, I will send you the prophet Elijah before the great and dreadful day of the Lord comes. The Jews would have known if Jesus said that Elijah and John were the same person, they would have been expecting in the Old Testament calls it the day of the Lord, and what we would know as God's judgment of the earth would come. Trying to think of the chapter that really describes it. It'll come to me later. But if John and Elijah were the same person, or he came in the spirit of Elijah, the Jews would have known, okay, we need to get ready because God's going to come and he's going to come judge us, and then the kingdom's come. Jesus was once again, even though he's talking about John, talking about himself, talking about the Messiah, talking about the coming judgment of God. Verse 15. He who has ears, let him hear. This phrase, if you guys remember from our study in the book of Revelation, was talked just in the first 2 chapters, first 3 chapters in the book of Revelation was mentioned 6 times. Jesus is calling out a special attention to what he's just said.
Because there's not too many people that can hear today. Very small percentage. They can see or hear.
Because they're deaf, dumb, and blind. And our enemy wants them that way. Jesus is saying, remember what I just told you. Think about it. Look at it. Study the scriptures. And that's why whenever we do any of these studies, and I'm going to borrow this from Chuck Missler, have Acts 17:11 written down, memorized. Acts 17:11 says, don't bother just listening to what Chris has to say, but really look in the Bible and see what it says. Now, I'll turn there. This verse has become so important for me because it's not what I say or my ideas or my, thinking that I know everything, but because I don't. Acts 17:11 says, now the Bereans were more noble character than the Thessalonians, for they received the message with great eagerness and examined the scriptures every day to see if what Paul said was true. So replace my name with Paul's name. For you received the message with great eagerness, and you examine the scriptures every day to see if what Chris said is true. You guys need to be more like the Bereans and not trust every single word either on me or Paul or any other pastor or teacher says, but that you really search the scriptures, because it's going to tell you. I brought up a lot of interesting ideas, a lot of interesting things that don't have a whole lot of scriptural evidence, but it's nice to think about. But the main thing I want you guys to get for this lesson is the whole idea of doubt versus faith. And the idea of the Old Testament or Old Covenants versus the New Covenant and how they're different. Because so many people want to either merge the two or depend upon one versus the other. Any questions before we go to communion? I know I've given you guys a lot to chew on, so that's why I print up these outlines. So that you guys during the week, if you guys have free time, which I know most of us don't, but if you guys, think of later in the week, you guys come up with a question, what exactly was that verse Chris referenced, or, what was he talking about? You guys have these so that you can look back on them. And so that way, it doesn't rely on my memory. Because if you ask me what the reference was for